Welcome back. President Trump is set to make good on another campaign promise this week by signing the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act. That legislation is two-pronged to make sure veterans get the long-awaited care that they desperately need and deserve. The bill would make it easier for VA employees, including executives, to be fired for poor performance or misconduct while giving whistleblowers more protection. The House and Senate passed the bill earlier this month. And let's talk about the state of the VA in the years leading up to the Trump administration. While President Obama was in office, the Inspector General reported back in 2015 that literally hundreds of thousands of veterans died before their applications for care could be processed. Over 300,000 is the exact report from the Veterans Health Administration. Now, a group fighting hard for this bill is the Concerned Veterans for America, and joining me live from Washington, D.C. is Rebecca Coffman with the CVA. Rebecca, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Patrick.
Well, Rebecca, the president is expected to sign this bill into law later this week. What does this mean for the veteran community?
That's correct. The president is expected to sign this bill later this week. This bill is a huge deal in the veterans community. For far too long, it's been nearly impossible to fire or discipline bad VA employees. And this bill will empower VA Secretary Shulkin with the ability to get those bad VA employees out of the department quickly. We think that this will really do a lot to help clean up the toxic culture at the department and take great strides to get veterans the care they need.
And you mentioned those employees, Rebecca. The group Paralyzed Veterans for America reported that during the early years of the Obama administration, the number of administrative staff in the VA, in centers all across the nation, grew from just a little over 200 to over 1,300, meaning that there were far more employees standing between basically a veteran and the care that they need. Is that just too much bureaucracy?
Right. Well, there's a lot of reasons that the VA is too bureaucratic, and needless personnel is certainly one of those reasons. VA Secretary Shulkin has identified that as a problem, and one of the first things he said when he became the VA Secretary was that he was going to take a careful look at each position within the VA and deem if it was necessary or not. There's no reason to have unnecessary positions within the VA. Unless you're doing your job to help veterans, there's no reason for you to work there. So we think that's great. But there are a lot of other reasons for bureaucracy and red tape within the VA. And one of those reasons is the reason that we need VA accountability. These employees who don't have an incentive to follow the rules because they know they're not going to get fired are just standing in the way of reform. So we're really, really, again, pleased that the president is going to sign this bill into law, hopefully later this week. And we're even more encouraged that both sides of the aisle of Congress came together to pass this meaningful reform. It was a bipartisan effort.
And touching on that one more time, why aren't these decision makers, these people in these hospitals are basically the front line of care for veterans who desperately need it. Why aren't they being held accountable?
Right. Well, I should start by saying that there are a lot of good VA employees, and we hear from veterans on the ground who are happy with their care. And that should be noted. There are a lot of dedicated employees within the VA who do a good job. But that said, if you think about it like a business, if you're an employee at a business and you know you're not going to get fired, you really don't have an incentive to do a good job, and you don't have an incentive to follow the rules. So that's what's been going on at the VA. These employees know they can underperform, they can engage in misconduct, they can waste money. In some extreme cases, they can even perform criminal acts and just get away with it. So this bill was really necessary to instate an era of accountability, work ethic, and integrity within the department. So if you just think of it like the way a basic business would operate, it's pretty much common sense.
And Rebecca, how does this bill help groups like the Concerned Veterans for America and your mission that you've been fighting for so long to save Americans' vets?
Right. Well, Concerned Veterans for America was formed in 2012, and VA accountability has been our #1 priority issue since that time. These are ideas that weren't always popular that CVA was championing during the Obama administration. And in 2014, when the Phoenix VA waitlist scandal emerged, in which it was discovered that employees at the Phoenix VA were manipulating wait times, and it was causing delayed care for veterans in Phoenix and around the country, CVA was the first veterans group to fly out there and really draw attention to this issue. Unfortunately, since that time, we've seen scandal after scandal emerging from the VA. We've seen regular reports of waste, fraud, and abuse, and horror stories, really, out of the department. So CVA has been championing this reform as an idea for years. We've supported various iterations of this bill as they've been introduced throughout the House and the Senate. Senator Marco Rubio has been a huge champion of these reforms, and we're so grateful for that. At the end of the day, this bill that got across the finish line, the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act of 2017, was a bill introduced by Senator Marco Rubio in the Senate. It was introduced by Phil Rowe in the House, and it got broad bipartisan support from Senate Democrats, House Democrats, and ultimately the president later this week.
Okay, and again, this week, President Trump is set to sign into law the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act for 2017. And we just have a couple more seconds here. Rebecca, what's next for your group?
Right. Well, accountability is a huge first step. So we'll be watching closely to make sure that this law is implemented properly and that we really are getting the bad VA employees out of the department. But really, the next battle for our organization and for veterans across the country that we fight on behalf of will be better access to health care. So how can we better connect veterans to the care they need and deserve? Sometimes that might be through the VA, and sometimes that might mean care outside of the VA. But right now, it's very hard for veterans to leave the VA for health care. So we're looking at policy proposals that would allow veterans to be empowered with the choice to use their benefits inside or outside of the department whenever it makes sense to them. We want to put the veteran at the center of their health care and take the VA out as the middleman. Again, accountability is a huge first step in that. We think that will do a lot to eliminate red tape and bureaucracy within the department and cut down on crime, mismanagement, waste, fraud, and abuse. But ultimately, the bigger battle that lies ahead is how do we quickly connect veterans with quality care? So our group is looking at a proposal that would, again, allow veterans to choose where and when to use their benefits.
Hey, Rebecca, well, this bill certainly looks to be a step in the right direction. We thank you so much for joining us live there in D.C.